when The View, even The View seems pretty stunned, that maybe somebody's kind of gone a little bit too far. That is what this one particular anchor over on MSNBC has a tendency, just a little teeny tendency to do. I'm talking about Rachel Maddow, the woman who spun together this actually really interesting, amazing narrative. It was written in part, of course, by the Hillary Clinton team about Russia. Every single night. If you tuned into her, my gosh, she just had one conspiratorial bomb like after another. That was what you call flame throwing. I used to watch her a little bit sort of on the competition. When you work in television, you often have what they call a competition monitor up. And so you can see what all the other folks are doing. And so I would watch Rachel and I was like, wow, it's actually very creative. I'm going to tell you this, the woman is good at her craft, right? She's pretty good at what she does, but it's a craft, a very narrative, styled craft, one filled with all kinds of twists and turns to keep you on bated breath. Remember when she had that whole business about she's got his taxes, this is Trump taxes, and she kind of strung it out for days, and oh my gosh, she was so excited, and then she's like, it was kind of a letdown. Well, now she's got something that is really sort of messed up in its thinking. She's basically making the point that Trump is going to be a dictator if he's not already, right? It's like fait accompli as far as Rachel Maddow and the left are concerned. He's going to take over in a, World War II-esque style. It's frankly insulting to all the Americans that lost loved ones in World War II. It's insulting to the Jewish people of the world. It's insulting to everyone that people even make those comparisons. But Rachel Maddow is kind of queen at that. And now she has a plan, I guess, to take down the Supreme Court in her own little twisted way. You want to talk twisted? This is it. I'm going to play it for you. We're going to discuss it on the other side. But hear how she's constantly contradicting herself, but somehow it's A-okay because you know what? It's Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is going to do bad things, good versus evil, right? Listen to what her plan is here for the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
John Roberts is probably the most important person in America right now when it comes to whether we're going to keep our system of government. Because Trump's involved in all this criminal stuff. And so he and his movement and the whole Republican Party, the Speaker, the House, all of them are saying the American legal system is corrupt and rigged and we ought to get rid of it. That's not great. What do you have if you don't have a legal system anymore? Yeah. But on the other hand, then you've got everybody trying to stand up for the legal system, say it's not rigged, it's legitimate, we need to support it. But the Supreme Court is flagrantly corrupt.
Yeah, that's right.
And so John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, there is flagrant corruption. If you had, so I work at MSNBC. There was a member of my family who's lobbying the White House Chief of Staff saying, overturn this election result. You think they'd let me cover that election result? Right. Let alone give a binding judicial ruling on that election result? The blatant corruption of a couple of these Supreme Court justices is John Roberts' problem. He's the Chief Justice. He has to police it.
Hang on. Can we just pause it right there?
Save the legal system. So we have some.
Because what she's sort of insinuating there, we'll go back to her in a second, but what she's suggesting is that somehow, if she had a family member, if she had a spouse, in her case, I guess, another woman, that was so strongly against something in particular, she said, in other words, basically, that's a dig at Clarence Thomas, Ginny Thomas feeling the way she feels, or perhaps Scalia because his wife is really into flags and flew hers upside down in the face of the New York Times reporter that seemed to win a Pulitzer Prize for her Michelle Obama reporting yet on fashion, yet took aim at many of the Supreme Court justices' wives' fashion. She seems to be saying that her network wouldn't let her report on that. I think that's just kind of funny and not at all true, given that one of their network reporters allegedly, per the Wall Street Journal, had kind of a thing with the CEO of Kevin Plank, and yet was still reporting on Kevin Plank. I mean, CEO of Under Armour, that would be Kevin Plank, was still reporting on Under Armour. And there's another network that would be the host of the new debate coming up next week, next Thursday, who had an anchor on the air, who had a brother who was the governor of New York. I'm talking about the Cuomo boys, okay? And somehow it was perfectly fine, absolutely fine for him to invite his brother on the show and to obviously have a point of view that was not in sync. It's totally different. She's trying to say that MSNBC is somehow above board. We know it's not, and we know the rest of the networks aren't either, but it's sort of an irrelevant argument because at the end of the day, they're just networks and they were talking about the Supreme Court. So really, you shouldn't even be comparing the two. What I would fundamentally come back to is this, and this only, ladies and gentlemen, that the Supreme Court of the United States of America has justices on it, left and right. And maybe it's not ideal to have your spouse putting all their political opinions out there. But I would say this, if you believe in the equality of men and women, which heck, Rachel, you of all people ought to, right? You MSNBC liberals, like you're all about equality. Except you're really not, because let's not kid ourselves. When Leah Thomas is taking the trophies away from Riley Gaines and any other girl that's competing in swimming, you know what? That's not equality. But we'll go with this idea that you care about equality for men and women. If you care about the equality of men and women, then guess what? Women ought to have their own opinions. Just because you're married to someone doesn't mean that you have to tout whatever that is, or even live within this narrow little box where you're not allowed to say what you might think. So she's just off on all her arguments, one after another. They don't make sense. She takes you on these wild little, twists and turns to compare MSNBC and the Supreme Court. I mean, it's irrelevant and doesn't make sense, but it's dumb. The whole thing is dumb, but it gets worse. So let's go back and listen to Rachel Maddow's explanation of just exactly what she thinks the Supreme Court ought to be doing.
Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Corrupt? There is flagrant corruption. So I work at MSNBC. There was a member of my family who's lobbying the White House Chief of Staff saying, overturn this election result. You think they'd let me cover that election result? Right. Let alone give a binding judicial ruling on that election result? I mean, the blatant corruption of a couple of these Supreme Court justices is John Roberts' problem. He's the Chief Justice, and he has to police it to save his court and to save the legal system. So we have something to stand up for.
So, you haven't noticed, I mean, Rachel's perpetuating this argument, right, that the Supreme Court is somehow corrupt. If you haven't noticed, like all our institutions seem to be crumbling down in real time. So the Supreme Court now, under fire, there's a reason for that, ladies and gentlemen. If they were all lefty justices, they wouldn't be trying to take down the Supreme Court. If Donald Trump was one of them, they wouldn't be trying to take down Trump. Let's be very clear about something. This is politically different. It's politically motivated. It's why when it looked like it might be Ron DeSantis that was in the game as the potential GOP contender, guess what? They went after him and they gave you the same old song and dance. He's racist, he's this, he's that. And then when it looked like it might be Nikki Haley, I know we don't want that. Neither do they. I mean, they went after her with the exact same stuff. So in other words, don't kid yourself. Yes, Trump stands up to it more than maybe Nikki would be able to, or Ron would be able to, certainly more than Mitt Romney did. But heck, they went after Mitt Romney and Bush. By the way, the whole Bush family, which suddenly now gets to have crowns on their heads, they were persona non grata. Like it was not good for them either. They don't like conservatives. They see Mitt Romney as having no power. Now he's joined them, right? As long as you're against Trump, you're on their side. But if Mitt Romney were to suddenly come out in great force for the likes of Ron DeSantis, if Ron DeSantis were top of the GOP ticket, guess what? They'd be against that too. They are against anyone who's not with them. And that means you get a Supreme Court that's not, quote unquote, with them, because gosh darn it, the Supreme Court might actually just vote on the side of the Constitution. So Rachel Maddow has to take them down. MSNBC has to take them down. CNN out there doing its part. Take a look at what this analyst had to say.
Safe. Let's talk about the U.S. Supreme Court, because we're still waiting for two major January 6th related cases to be decided on presidential immunity and whether or not the obstruction of a proceeding charges were appropriate ones for the January 6th rioters. At a fundraiser in Hollywood last night, or Los Angeles last night, President Biden referred to the upside down flag that Martha and Alito flew outside their home. He said the court has never been as out of kilter as it is today. And there are a lot of other remarks along those lines. Is it appropriate for a president to criticize the court like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a crisis on the court. I mean, in particular with respect to Justice Alito and Justice Thomas. What Justice Thomas is engaged in is just a grift, right? He's got a major political player on the outside who absolutely has political and business interests at the court paying off a justice. Justice Alito is openly displaying affiliation with political causes in public. I think it would be irresponsible for the president not to talk about the fact that this court is becoming brazenly corrupt and brazenly political. And it's up to the American people, this election, to do something about that. It's also up to Congress to step up and pass a code of conduct, a code of ethical conduct for this court before it's too late.
Let me ask you about.
So you've got Biden calling out the Supreme Court. You got the senator from Connecticut, Democrat Senator Chris Murphy. You get the CNN guy who's actually going to be hosting, believe it or not, hosting a debate, a big debate next week. Like, he's not biased. Okay, so they're all doing the same thing. Watch, just watch. I want you to be prepared for this. You can say, you know what, Trish told me first. They're trying to take this down. And let me just tell you this. I've seen it before. I mean, what do you think happened? Not to scare you or alarm you, but this is exactly the first thing that they did in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. In the year 2000, he comes to power. I was actually trading Venezuelan debt at the time, going back a ways. The year 2000, okay? He comes to power, and his first action is to get rid of the Supreme Court. Why? Because that enables him, you want to talk dictatorship, to stay in power and to do what he wants to do because he's got his cronies there okaying it. They want to stack the court. They've said as much. And now they're putting in a motion, a plan of action of some sort to undermine trust in this great institution that has the executive oversight, I should say, the oversight over the executive branch, right? I mean, this is really alarming. They are willing to move anything they need to move to basically subvert the will of the people. If you like him, Donald Trump, we're going to make sure that he's not elected. If you vote for him, we're going to make sure. I mean, I'm telling you, you know what's going to have to happen? They're going to have to see such a massive landslide in order for this not to be hotly contested. They're worried that it will be a contested election and that the Supreme Court will ultimately be favorable or at least fair to Trump in ways that they want to ensure the Supreme Court is not. So be on the lookout for it. It's something that I think you need to understand and be warned about.